For 3 decades, you could not watch the Oscars without finding Jack Nicholson in the front row, that grin catching the camera before the camera knew where to look. He sat courtside at every Lakers home game in Los Angeles, close enough to the floor that the players could hear him from the bench. 12 Oscar nominations across 5 decades, 3 of them wins, and a face more recognizable than half the films that built it. Then, sometime around 2010, the appearances stopped. Without a press conference, without a farewell interview, without a final film he had picked on his own terms. He was everywhere one year and gone the next. Tabloids ran their theories, fans asked questions no one seemed able to answer, and somewhere in the silence, the truth got harder to find. So here's the real one. What actually happened to Jack Nicholson? He was born in Neptune City, New Jersey in the spring of 1937, a working-class town on the Jersey Shore where nobody had much and everyone knew everyone else's business, except sometimes their own. The house John Joseph Nicholson grew up in held 2 women he believed were his mother and his older sister. Ethel, the woman who fed him and walked him to school, was Mom. June, 17 years older, was the sibling who had left young to chase a dancing career. As far as Jack knew, this was the architecture of his family, and there was no reason to look any closer at it. He was 37 before that architecture collapsed, and it was a magazine that brought it down. In 1974, a Time researcher running a routine background check for a profile piece pulled the records, compared the dates, and saw something Jack had never been told. June was not his sister. June was his mother. Ethel, the woman he had called Mom for 37 years, was his grandmother. The reporter called Nicholson's people. Nicholson's people called Nicholson. By the time the truth reached him, both women had been dead for years, and there was nothing left to do with the information except absorb it. He has talked about it over the years with a composure that itself tells you something. "It's a pretty dramatic thing," he said once, almost offhandedly. "The way a man speaks about something he has absorbed so completely it no longer has edges. What it actually cost him is harder to name, but the man who spent the next 5 decades playing characters who refused to be cornered, who laughed in the face of authority, who always seemed to know something the room did not. That man was shaped here in Neptune City, inside a house built on a secret nobody ever explained to him. What he did with the discovery was leave New Jersey. He moved to Los Angeles as a young man with no particular plan and spent the better part of a decade doing what most aspiring actors do, which is wait. The roles he managed to get were small parts in forgettable films, the kind of work that barely registers as a credit by the time the lights come up. While Paul Newman was becoming a star and Steve McQueen was filling magazine covers, Jack Nicholson was bouncing between B pictures, collecting rejection with no indication from Hollywood that any of it was ever going to change. Then, a low-budget road movie came along in 1969 that the major studios wanted nothing to do with. Easy Rider had been shot for $400,000, directed by a first-timer, considered too raw and too strange for mainstream audiences. The original actor cast for the part, Rip Torn, fell out with director Dennis Hopper in a pre-production dispute, and Nicholson stepped in as his replacement. He played Hanson for roughly 30 minutes of screen time, sitting around campfires and motel rooms, talking about freedom the way men talk about something they have already lost. By the time the film finished its theatrical run, he had been nominated for an Academy Award. What audiences caught in those 30 minutes was something the industry had been failing to see for the better part of 10 years. There was the voice first, unhurried, carrying a quiet current of intelligence beneath every line, dragging the rhythm of a scene to whatever pace Nicholson had decided it should run at. There was the grin, capable of meaning a dozen different things inside the same sentence. And there was the feeling, in every moment he occupied, that something could shift at any time, that he might do something the script had not quite planned for. Hollywood had been looking past Jack Nicholson for 10 years. Easy Rider made it impossible to keep doing so. Within 5 years, he was carrying films. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest won him his first Academy Award in 1976. Randall McMurphy played with the energy of a man who treats every institution as a personal affront, a performance that swept the Best Picture category and lifted Nicholson into the small handful of actors who could carry an entire film on the strength of their own presence. Terms of Endearment in 1983 brought him his second, a supporting turn so precise and so funny it nearly hijacked a movie that wasn't built around him. As Good as It Gets in 1997 brought him his third, Melvin Udall, the obsessive-compulsive novelist who is difficult to love and impossible to look away from. 3 Academy Awards across 3 separate decades, making him one of only 7 performers in history to win 3 acting Oscars. What set him apart was harder to put into words than it was to recognize. Other actors inhabited their characters. Nicholson seemed to arrive on set already knowing something about human nature that the script had only partially worked out. Directors recognized it, co-stars recognized it, and the camera recognized it most of all, lingering on him longer than the editing pace strictly required because cutting away from his face always felt like the wrong choice. When he delivered the line, "You can't handle the truth in A Few Good Men," the audience didn't applaud. It sat back. There is a difference between a performance and a verdict, and for nearly 3 decades, Jack Nicholson kept delivering the second one. By 1989, the performances were paying him in the territory of $10 million a picture, a figure that placed him at the very top of the industry. When Warner Brothers brought him an offer to play the Joker in Tim Burton's Batman, he agreed to lower his fee to $6 million, a discount the studio congratulated itself on without quite understanding what he had taken in exchange. In place of the missing $4 million, Nicholson had negotiated a percentage of the film's box office and, more importantly, a cut of every piece of Joker-branded merchandise the studio sold. The toys, the costumes, the lunchboxes, the posters, the video games. Superhero films were still considered a gamble in 1989, and nobody could guarantee Batman would become the cultural phenomenon it did. When the film hit, it grossed over $400 million worldwide, and the merchandise empire that followed was almost beyond accounting. By the time the final numbers came in, Nicholson had taken home somewhere between $60 and $90 million from a single film, more money per word of dialogue than any actor in the history of Hollywood. His biographer Mark Elliott would later put the higher number closer to the truth. The man who had spent a decade collecting rejection in B-movies had, in one negotiation, written the contract blueprint that Tom Cruise, Jim Carrey, and eventually Robert Downey Jr. would spend the next 30 years following. The contract was a masterpiece. The man behind it was harder to assess. On the morning of February 8, 1994, Nicholson was driving to his golf club in North Hollywood when another driver, a man named Robert Blank, cut him off at a red light. What happened next was witnessed by people on the street and documented in court filings. Nicholson stepped out of his car, walked around to the trunk, and selected the one club he never used on the course, his 2-iron. He crossed the intersection to Blank's Mercedes-Benz and proceeded to smash the roof and the windshield while the man was still sitting inside it. When Golf Digest, of all publications, eventually asked him about it years later, he recalled being fully aware of what he was doing as he was doing it. The charges filed were misdemeanor, assault and vandalism, and the settlement was reported at $500,000. Nicholson would describe the episode, with an economy that itself sounded calculated, as a shameful incident in my life. It wasn't an isolated moment so much as a window onto something else. Angelica Houston, who knew him better than almost anyone after 17 years together, wrote candidly about the volatility of their relationship, the serial infidelities, and the chaos they produced. Other incidents surfaced over the years and were quietly settled, rarely revisited by a press that preferred the charming version of the story. The public Jack Nicholson, warm, witty, the man in the front row waving at the camera, was real, and he was also only one version of a man who contained several. The end, when it came, arrived in the unlikely shape of a romantic comedy. In 2010, Nicholson reunited with James L. Brooks, the director who had given him 2 of his 3 Oscars, for a film called How Do You Know, opposite Reese Witherspoon, Owen Wilson, and Paul Rudd. On paper, the project had every reason to work. A celebrated director, a proven leading man, a cast of names audiences trusted. Sony Pictures invested $120 million in it. The opening weekend brought in $7.5. By the time it left theaters, the film had earned just under $50 million worldwide, which made it, once inflation was factored in, one of the most expensive box office failures in Hollywood history. Critics were no kinder than audiences had been. The picture carried a 31% approval rating and reviews that described it as mirthless, flat, the work of people going through motions they no longer believed in. He never told anyone it was the last one. He just finished the shoot, went home, and never appeared on a soundstage again. The man who had negotiated the smartest contract in the history of Hollywood, who turned $6 million into 90, walked out the door for the last time on a film that lost $70 million and that almost no one remembers today. 3 years passed in silence, and silence creates its own narrative. In 2013, a tabloid website published a story that spread across Hollywood within hours. Jack Nicholson had retired, the report claimed, and the reason was as simple as it was devastating: memory loss. At 76, he could no longer remember his lines. The story was picked up, repeated, and amplified until it acquired the weight of confirmed fact. For a man whose entire public identity had been built on sharpness, on wit, on always being the most aware person in any room, it was a particularly cruel narrative to attach to his name. Then, Nicholson gave an interview, and the narrative collapsed. He was dry, precise, faintly amused by the whole thing. He still had, in his own words, a mathematician's brain. He hadn't retired so much as become selective to the point where selectivity looked like absence. Major roles had been offered and turned down, among them the lead in Alexander Payne's Nebraska, a film that went on to receive widespread critical acclaim. He simply wasn't interested. The scripts arriving at his door weren't moving him the way he needed to be moved, and in one interview, he said it plainly. He only wanted to make films about emotions and people, and the projects on offer weren't that. It was a standard almost no film could meet, which was perhaps exactly the point. The dementia story had been false, but the question underneath it, whether he was choosing this silence or retreating into it, was one that only the people closest to him would ever be in a position to answer. Some of the people closest to him had stories of their own. In February of 2023, a woman named Tessa Gurin published an essay in Newsweek. She was 28 years old. She was, by her account, Jack Nicholson's daughter, and in her whole life, the two of them had never had a relationship. He had never publicly acknowledged that she existed. The contrast with the rest of his family was hard to ignore. His daughter Lorraine appeared regularly at his side at birthday celebrations, public events, the rare photographs that trickled out from his private life. His son Ray had followed him into acting and was quietly building a career of his own. These were the children the public knew about, the ones who turned up in the frame when the lens swept across his world. Tessa was not in any frame. While Nicholson cultivated the image of a devoted, if unconventional father, a man who had mellowed with age, who valued family above almost everything else, there was a daughter across the city who had grown up without him ever choosing to be present. He has never publicly responded to her essay. The silence has held for years, unbroken in any direction. The charming Hollywood rebel that audiences had watched for 50 years, the man in the front row with the grin that could mean anything, had, in this one quiet corner of his life, chosen silence. And silence, as Tessa Gurin's essay made clear, can cause its own kind of damage, which makes what happened on the evening of February 16, 2025, all the more striking. Studio 8H at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, the 50th anniversary special of Saturday Night Live, an audience filled with Robert De Niro, Meryl Streep, Paul McCartney, Cher. 5 decades of American entertainment gathered into a single room. From his seat in the audience, an 87-year-old man in a dark jacket and a Yankees beret leaned forward and spoke 5 words into a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, Adam Sandler." The room erupted. Sandler, standing on stage with an acoustic guitar, turned toward him and grinned. "Jack made it out tonight. Love you, brother." It was the first time most of the world had seen Jack Nicholson in 2 years, and he looked sharp, present, unmistakably alert, a man who had decided exactly how much of himself the world was going to get and had shown up that evening entirely on his own terms, for a friend he wanted to honor, in a room full of people who understood what it meant that he had come at all. 5 words, a smile, and then he settled back into his seat and the spotlight moved on. The curtain had lifted, just enough to answer the question this video started with. What actually happened to Jack Nicholson? The honest answer is that nothing happened to him. He happened to Hollywood for 50 years on his own terms, by his own design, and then he decided he was finished. The man who negotiated the most lucrative single-film contract in the history of the industry chose his retirement the same way he chose the 2 iron over every other club in the bag. Deliberately, with full awareness of what he was doing. That doesn't resolve everything, because nothing about Jack Nicholson ever did. There is the daughter who grew up without him, the incidents a charming public image absorbed and moved past, the people who deserved more from him than he ever managed to give. The full picture is not the one printed on the Oscar posters, and it never was. Greatness and generosity are not the same thing, and he was always more reliably the first than the second, but what remains is real. 12 Oscar nominations across 5 decades, 3 wins, a body of work, Easy Rider, Chinatown, The Shining, As Good as It Gets, that will outlast every tabloid story ever written about him. A contract that changed the way Hollywood pays its biggest stars. And in February of 2025, an 87-year-old man in a Yankees beret, sitting in a room full of legends, choosing to show up for a friend. There was never any vanishing. He simply decided, at a certain point, that he had already given the world everything he intended to give. For Jack Nicholson, that was always going to be enough. Offscript publishes a new documentary every week, the real stories behind the names you grew up watching. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and tell us in the comments which moment surprised you most. See you in the next one.